All right, hello there, and welcome to Chapter 13. What we're going to do here today is go over some more scales. We've been talking a lot about major scales up to this point, and we've also talked about some pentatonic scales. Well, we're going to finish off by introducing all the rest of the pentatonic scales, and we're going to talk about how to apply them into some different situations. Okay, so we're getting more broad with our base of knowledge, and I hope that you've been practicing hard with the other stuff, but keep applying it to what you've been working on. Keep doing things in time frames like we've talked about in other lessons. Make sure you put a schedule together with your practice so you're doing time frames and you're really keeping track of what you're practicing and having a goal every time you sit down to practice. Okay, so the goal today is to work on the pentatonic scales and finish off the rest of them, and we're going to apply them to some great music called blues. So let's take a look at what we've got here on our board. Now, you might see variations of patterns here based off the circled and squared off notes, and I want to explain that a little bit so we can save you confusion at home. Okay, the circled notes equal the root of the major pentatonic scales. Okay, now remember we talked about pentatonics before and how a major and a minor pentatonic exist within the same scale. So I'll use an example here of this pattern right here. This is a G major pentatonic scale. Oop. Let me turn off my pedal here. This is a G major pentatonic scale based off the pattern 5 shape right here. Okay. However, it's also a E minor pentatonic scale based off the root right here. But it's the same exact notes, right? Because minor and major can exist within the same pattern. This is called the E minor pentatonic scale that exists within the G major pentatonic scale. So here's E minor. Okay, it sounds really great over the E minor chord, or even for that matter, E7, but we're going to use it today in a variety of different situations. So it's G major, and it's also, at the same time, it's also E minor. Okay, so what I've done now is I've taken that same concept and applied it to all the different major pentatonics, and I've squared off the notes that relate to the roots of the minor pentatonic scale. So check it out. Here's the next here's another pattern right here of G major pentatonic. We've learned this one before, I think. That's a G major pentatonic. And look at how closely that relates to some of the major scales that we've been playing. Here's pattern 1 G major scale. And the pentatonic scale we know is a 5-note scale, so that's simply this. But it still relates to that same shape, right? But it's also, where did my pattern go? It's also an E minor pentatonic scale if we call this the tonic. Same exact notes, but it's the internal diatonic minor pentatonic scale inside of G major pentatonic. So. Those kind of chords, that scale would sound great. Okay, and then so on and so forth. So check it out. Here's a pattern 2 G major pentatonic up here, based off the pattern 2 shape. We've talked about major scales right here too. But now we're talking about a pentatonic scale. We know a pentatonic scale is a 5-note scale. So here we go. 5 notes of G major pentatonic sound like this. Okay, but that same G major pentatonic scale could be viewed as an E minor pentatonic scale, and without doing anything, it's right there. It's E minor pentatonic, right? Right? But you haven't really had to learn anything differently. It's just a matter of what you call the root, okay? And there's a reason why sometimes you think of something as minor and sometimes you think of something as major. We're going to talk about that in other lessons. But I'm just trying to show you that if you've learned your major pentatonic scales, and I know we've talked about them, we've also actually learned all of our minor pentatonic scales. So I'm just reviewing this now so you really can see the picture all coming together. Our pattern 5 G major pentatonic would be right here. There's the roots circled for major pentatonic. Right? But we know it's also the relative minor is E minor, so it's perfectly at home over an E7 chord or an E minor chord. Works great. And then finally, the last one I think we haven't covered here is G major pentatonic. I know we've done this, but I'm just going to cover it here one more time in this lesson. Here's G major pentatonic right here, and we've also called that E minor pentatonic. If you call these notes the root, in fact, that could also be the root as well. I didn't mark it there, but. Okay, so we've got the whole neck together now in terms of what I've exposed you to and what I've shown you. You still have a lot of work to practice and get this stuff together, but I'm kind of putting it all together now for you. You've got all the shapes of pentatonic scales, you've got all the shapes of the major scales, and you've got all the shapes of the minor pentatonic scales. Okay, so you've got a lot of work, a lot of things to learn and practice, but you're really well on your way to getting these things down if you see the whole system and the way it fits together. That's what I'm trying to show you. It's a system that really makes sense if you view it in the right methodical way. Okay, so I hope you're trying to put that all together and you're starting to understand it. Okay, now let's talk about how we're going to utilize these scales if we could. You will recall that in previous lessons I've introduced the concept of harmony, and the concept of harmony where we took the major scale, right? Right? And we harmonized, in other words, we stacked every other note of the scale on top of every note, and we created chords. You remember that lesson? So we had chords like C major, the 2 chord became D minor. I'm using C major as my example. 3 chord became E minor, 4 chord F major, 5 chord G major, 6 chord A minor, 7 chord B diminished, and then we end up back at 1 again. And this is what's known as the diatonic harmony of a major scale, in this case C major. Okay? Now, how does that help us today with our pentatonics? Well, we're going to apply the pentatonic scale over what we commonly love to play and a basis for so much great music, the style of blues. Okay? We're going to talk about blues today, and we're going to apply and try to make the connection from a diatonic major progression like this and see how it relates to blues. Okay? So check it out. You'll notice that on the C major chord, underneath the number of the 1, the 4, and the 5, I wrote arrows down to these other chords here. Okay? Now you might be going, what does that mean? What does that mean? What's he doing there? Okay? Well, I'm trying to show you that a blues progression, is based, strictly speaking, right off the diatonic harmony of a major scale. Okay? So when something is called a 1-4-5 progression, what someone's saying is they're playing a 1 chord to the 4th chord of a key to the 5 chord of a key, and that's called a 1-4-5. Okay? But how does that relate to blues? Well, let's see. Let's figure this out. A long time ago, when blues was first really being innovated, really in the late 1800s, mid 1800s, it was basically the combination of the black influence of slaves and the melodies and the themes that they brought over in their own music and blended with the European classical music of the time So basically we had European music mixed with African sounds and influences that kind of merged together. They created more or less the beginning of popular music and Western and popular music, and especially blues. And so when the sounds of diatonic harmony from European music was mixed with more of the influences of the black slaves and the black cultures from Africa at the time, we started to hear sounds that became, it was really a basis of melodies that were being sung against these chords. You might have heard major progressions like that, but you started to hear notes like this against this. Right? That's really a definite minor third against a major chord. How does that work? Well, that was just the way it was being sung, and that was just the way that these people were feeling. Right? They weren't feeling real happy. It was a little bit more oppressive, and it wasn't exactly, happy on the farm there. So there was a little bit more of a melancholy sound, and that was the sound of minor scales or minor pentatonics, like these sounds, over major chords. So what happened is it started to become a style into itself. The 1-4-5 sounds of progressions were mixed with the minor pentatonic melodies of the black and the African slaves, and it became a style into itself called blues. And so it was really a beautiful embodiment of music that really became its own thing, that has really influenced profoundly all music that we call popular music today. So.